Today I'm going to talk about an album by The Doors, which is often considered to be their weakest album with Jim Morrison. In other words, not counting the two albums after Jim Morrison, but it's their weakest, and it's even debatable. But the album suffered a lot of problems, such as the band being tired, the producer having to take a new direction, adding new musicians into the mix, and a shift of certain responsibilities within band members in terms of songwriting. I'll be talking about all of this in the video. So The Soft Parade was released on July 18, 1969. It is celebrating 55 years. It did well on the charts at first. It peaked at number 6 on the Billboard 200, but did not do as well in other countries. There were 4 singles released from the album, but only one of them was a hit single. The critics did not like the change in sound at first, but over time, the album has held up, despite still being the weakest of the Morrison albums. Let me get into a little bit of history with this album. Back in 1968, The Doors were one of the biggest bands in the U.S. They released their previous album, Waiting for the Sun, about a year before this one. Waiting for the Sun is one of my personal favorites. I would rank it at the top along with their debut album. Waiting for the Sun was a number 1 album, also had a number 1 single, Hello, I Love You. Due to the success of this album, Waiting for the Sun, The Doors started playing larger venues and charged more for their performances. There were even radio stations that began sponsoring their performances, even though they previously refused to do so. The band was on the top of the world. Now it's time for them to start thinking about another album. They began by writing 2 songs from the album called Wild Child and Wishful Sinful. But then after that, the band landed one of the biggest gigs by playing a few shows with Jefferson Airplane in Europe, as well as a few more dates in the U.S. All this touring made it difficult for the band to find time to write songs for the album in question, The Soft Parade. They also used up all the songs from Jim Morrison's songbooks. But speaking of Jim Morrison, all this success affected him in a different way. He started to become unpredictable and distant. He was drinking a lot of alcohol. He spent a lot of time focused on different things, such as writing poetry and making films. Jim Morrison also had problems with anxiety and was on the brink of an emotional breakdown. He almost quit the band, but Ray Manzarek convinced him to stay for at least one more album. In hindsight, we would see that he would stay for another 2 more albums. It was now officially time to work on a new album, The Soft Parade. It was November 1968. There was this new recording studio that just opened in Los Angeles. It was Electrosound West on La Cienega Boulevard. They continued working in the studio for a few months, and they didn't complete the process until May of 1969. But they had one big problem. They didn't have any material ready for the recording. So the producer, Paul A. Rothschild, took over the recording process. He even asked the band to change a lot of the songs. Jim Morrison did not like having someone telling him what to do, so he became difficult to work with. There was also another problem. The producer, Paul A. Rothschild, was also doing a lot of cocaine, and he became somewhat of a dictator in the studio. He would constantly butt heads with his advisor, Jack Holtzman, and all this conflict made this the most expensive album by the band. They spent $80,000 to make the album. As a comparison, the first album only cost $10,000, and most people would consider that album to be much better. Now you may be wondering, what did they use all that money for? A lot of the money was used to hire additional musicians. The first person hired was Paul A. Harris, who worked on the string and orchestral arrangements with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. They also hired jazz horn players, and they hired 2 more musicians to play bass, and they were Doug Lubahan, who was pretty much an unofficial bass player in the band, and Harvey Brooks, another bass player who had also worked with Bob Dylan. With all these new people being added to the mix, the album ended up mixing up a lot of different styles. You had the classic sound with the psychedelic rock and blues rock, but they also wanted to add in some pop and jazz to the sound. At first, the idea of adding in some more jazz to the sound was not a bad idea, considering that John Densmore and Ray Manzarek had some experience with the genre. Ray and John also considered the idea of using more horn and string sections in the past. As I mentioned before, Jim Morrison was less involved on this album. There were even certain lyrics that he refused to sing, and for that reason, this is the first album by The Doors to list band members separately as writers, as opposed to just being collectively The Doors. All this led to certain members incorporating their personal influences into the sound, especially Robbie Krieger, who wrote half of the songs on the album and Jim Morrison wrote the other half. There was one exception. The song Do It was credited to both artists. For that reason, the album did not have a unified sound that was present on their previous albums. So, for example, songs written by Robbie Krieger had more of a jazz influence and therefore included more horn sections. And this could be heard on the songs Tell All the People, Touch Me, Runnin' Blue, and Wishful Sinful. On the other hand, the songs written by Jim Morrison had more of that classic sound. The album has 9 songs with a runtime of 33 minutes. The opening track was called Tell All the People. This was the 3rd single that was released in June of 1969. The B-side of the song was Easy Ride, which was an outtake from Waiting for the Sun that was recorded back in March of 1968. This song had the new sound that I've been talking about with the horn sections and orchestral arrangements. The song did okay on the charts, reaching number 57 on the Billboard Hot 100. I thought that the song was not too bad. The horns really gave it a different sound, but Jim Morrison makes it sound good. I mean, if it was any other singer, I probably wouldn't have liked the song. Then after this is the song Touch Me. This was the biggest song from the album. It was a hit. It was written by Robbie Krieger. Despite the change in sound, it was their biggest hit from the album. The song had brass and string instruments and included a solo by saxophonist Curtis Amy. The song was also supposedly the first rock hit ever to have a jazz solo in it. The song reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and also their last top 10 hit in the US. The song also had a few different working titles, such as I'm Gonna Love You, which is from the chorus, and Hit Me, which made reference to the game Blackjack. And this was because the opening line to the song was originally, Come on and hit me, I'm not afraid, which was the point of view of a blackjack player. But Jim Morrison wanted to change it because he was afraid people would take it literally during live shows and actually come up and hit him. This was one song from the album that I've listened to the most, and it has appeared on various compilation albums and played on the radio and things like that. After this is the song Shaman's Blues, written by Jim Morrison. Now in this one you can immediately hear the difference in sound. It had more of that typical sound with a psychedelic guitar and keyboards. It was another laid-back song. This one also had a keyboard and guitar solo. It was a typical rock song. Then there was a song Do It, the only song co-written by both Jim and Robbie. This one also had the classic sound. It was a slow-building song that picks up after the first minute. And it was one of those Doors songs that kind of sounds like carnival music. You probably know what I mean. It was also kind of psychedelic and had the repetitive chorus where he's saying, please, please listen to the children. The first song on side 2 is Wild Child, written by Jim Morrison. It's a pretty cool song. Has that bluesy guitar riff, very reminiscent of 5 to 1 from LA Woman. And that song was pretty cool because Jim Morrison does both the singing and has a spoken part as well. After this is the song Runnin' Blue, written by Robbie Krieger. This was the 4th single released in August of 1969. Had the song Do It as the B-side, and this was the only song where Robbie Krieger contributes vocals along with Jim Morrison, and the only one of its kind. The song was inspired by the death of Otis Redding, and the lyrics make a reference to sitting on the dock of the bay. The song had elements of R&B as well as bluegrass. It also had American bluegrass musician Jesse McReynolds playing the mandolin, and I'll be honest with you, I don't like this song that much. I think there's one part where it sounds like country music, square dancing. It kind of takes away from it, but it has lots of horns, and that kind of brings it down for me as well. But there are parts of the song I like. I like the psychedelic and jazzy parts. And after that is a song called Wishful Sinful, also written by Robbie Krieger. It was the 2nd single after Touch Me. This one features elements of classical music and string instruments, as well as an English horn solo. Critics called it both chamber rock and baroque pop. I like the song a lot. I like the orchestral sections. That the fact that they're in the background and they're not really in your face, it sounds more like a typical classic rock ballad. And the last song on the album is the title track, The Soft Parade. The song was written by the band, but credited to Jim Morrison. The song is considered to be one of the most experimental. A lot of the lyrics were taken from Jim Morrison's poetry. The song itself was inspired by people who walked along Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles on a daily basis. At the beginning of the song, Jim Morrison does the spoken word part where he acts as a preacher. It's a weird song. Starts off like a psychedelic rock song, then goes into this happy melody. It sounds like musical box is playing, and then it goes into this groovy bass line where Jim Morrison says, "Oh, this is the best part of the trip," and you can hear the psychedelic keyboards. And after that is the part where he sings "Welcome to the Soft Parade," and that part of the song sounds like a typical Doors song. So, in conclusion, I think this is the weakest of the Jim Morrison albums, not counting Other Voices and the one after that, Full Circle. But at the same time, I like most of the songs on the album. I would probably say it's one of my favorite albums from the year 1969. If I made a list of my favorite albums from 1969, like this would be probably still in the top 10. So let me know if you like this album or if you don't like the album. In the meantime, check out the review I did for Waiting for the Sun. I did that last year. And thanks for watching. Please like this video. Please hit the bell for notifications. You can find me on Facebook and you can find me at TikTok. I will see you in the next one.